Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today we're talking to Danny Fingeroth about Darkhawk, Heart of the Hawk #1, which is
Holy
out
cow.
in April.
Yes.
So the way that this was solicited is celebrate the 30th anniversary of the 90s hottest hero in 3 spectacular stories. And I got to tell you, that is some Stan Lee level selling. Hey,
It is.
did you know that you wrote a book about Stan Lee?
I didn't know. I must have I must have slept written or something. I don't know. Wow, tell me about it. Is it any good?
It's funny. I can actually, you told me to get the audiobook, but I got the paperback instead, and I think I can hear your voice as you're talking here.
I mean, as you're reading it, I guess.
As I'm reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can kind of hear his voice as he's writing this.
There's not much of a barrier, but if you get the audiobook, it's 14 hours of this. So who would not want that? Also,
Absolutely.
hear me pronounce words that I never had to actually pronounce in real life before. That was even anyway. But I'm glad
Like
you picked it
what?
up. Well, the one I always go back to is what I say, the phrase "sui generis," but I have no idea if it's sui generis, if something.
Yeah.
It means something unique, something like it's one of a kind, I think. But when you're reading an audiobook of something you have written, you just realize there's many words that you've either never said out loud, or you said out loud to people who either don't know what the correct pronunciation is or are too polite to correct you. But just still, but I had a very good director, who gave me my choice. He would like go to the dictionary and tell me the correct pronunciation of words, and then said, "But if you want to do it your own stupid way, go ahead and do it."
So let's do this. You have the first story from this Darkhawk special with Mike Manley. For the people who are coming into this late and don't know who Darkhawk is, can you give us your best Stan Lee pitch for this character?
Spider-Man for the 90s, except imagine the 90s was now, and imagine it was 1990 when we started pitching it. We started promoting it, so that it was the 90s had just barely begun, and this was coming out in early 91. It was Spider-Man for the 90s. It was a teenage kid going to high school in Peter Parker's high school, Midtown High,
Midtown High, yeah.
who is gifted with this magical seeming amulet, not omelet, amulet. That's one of those words.
I'd like a magical omelet right now.
Magic. that would be good too. That's my, you're giving away the secrets of my next character. So it was this magic amulet that actually was super scientific, that he finds in an abandoned amusement park in Queens at the same time as he's witnessing his police officer father seeming to take a payoff from a mobster. So he has this crisis of identity, where his father seems to be betraying everything he ever taught his son to believe in, and young Chris Powell simultaneously gets the Darkhawk amulet, transforms into this android superhuman character, and fights crime and tries to uphold his father's ideals, even though his father seems to have turned his back on them. So it's the ultimate Marvel story. It's a father-son story. It's a soap opera story. It's a transformation story. It's a superhero story. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll kiss your $4.99 goodbye.
And
Darkhawk was while I wrote every single issue of the 50 issues of his original run, and 3 annuals and a miniseries. It was created by Tom DeFalco and Mike Manley. That was in an era and Mike was the artist for the first 25 issues in the first annual, and he and
He's
I are
doing this
doing
one.
this new one. It was an era when Marvel was, it was that 5 minutes when Marvel was, we had a plan. We were going to rationally come up with one new series every month. And so if you came up with 12 new series in a year and you figure half of them would succeed and half would fail, you would grow the line at a rational, intelligent pace of 6 titles a year. Well, of course, that, as soon as the big boom of the early 90s happened, that went out the window, and we were getting, orders from the upper levels to crank out as much stuff as we could. But there was that window of maybe a year and a half, 2 years, where I guess the best known are maybe New Warriors, Darkhawk. Yeah. And since I was editing New Warriors and editing Spider-Man, Darkhawk, got to hang out a lot with the New Warriors, and Spider-Man villains were constantly appearing in Darkhawk.
His first villain is the Hobgoblin.
Yeah, it's true. Well, the first villain is really this Philippe Bazin, who was the gangster who he saw, whose henchman he saw paying off his father. Maybe it might have been Bazin himself, named after, of course, the famous French film critic of the 40s and 50s, Andre Bazin.
You had him go around the Spider-Man books too quite a bit.
Yeah, and then
Just a
we
little bit.
had that. Well, I mean, this is we had one summer we had a big Spider-Man. The big Spider-Man event that summer was the Round Robin, the Sidekicks
Yeah.
Revenge, and Darkhawk was in that. And I mean that that was based out of an obscure storyline in Moon Knight, which I was also editing. I don't know if you can hear some authentic New York radiator background, clanging radiator background noise here.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Although I am in Doctor Strange's Sanctorum. Yeah, so he did get around to the Spidey books, and Spidey appeared in his book. But I mean, there was we were putting out at the peak of the comics boom in the early 90s. I think we were putting out 130 comics, 130 titles a month. So there was a lot of crossing over and guest starring, and just any and every combination of those characters we could come up with.
For the math challenged out there, that is more than twice the number of 52. How come so this is interesting to me, because Tom DeFalco and Mike Manley created him. So how come you wrote Darkhawk? Because usually when the creator ends up writing the first arc, at least, right?
Yeah, well, this goes back to that what I was talking about, sort of this idea of rational expansion. So Tom saw it as part of his job to help grow the line. And so he and Mark Gruenwald, it was not uncommon for editorial to come up with characters and come up with plot lines, or at least outlines for plot lines. I think it still goes on, certainly with the storylines. So I think Tom saw it as that if Marvel was going to come up with a new title every month, and if what people were submitting, from the pool of writers wasn't anything we wanted to do, then Tom would just do that and launch it. It just was really part of keeping the machine going. I mean, because I don't think he ever. I mean, at one point I was the editor of it, and I was trying to put teams together, and I thought I had a team, and then then it fell through. And then Tom said to me, maybe you should write it and somebody else should edit it, and I was, both creatively and financially, I was happy to do that. So I don't remember him having any sense of ownership of it, like I think
Mhm.
it just was part of the job. There seems to be a large audience, and whether they're putting them in plastic bags or reading them or both, whatever they're doing with them, there's a demand for more and more stuff. And then it was that eternal competition with DC and whoever else for shelf space and rack space in stores. But it just was it was I'm not I honestly don't know how he feels about
Interesting.
the character. I think he just saw it as maybe he loves the character and I don't even know it.
Weird.
I think he liked what I did with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just was part of what we did.
Yeah, even the solicits, they list you as the creator. So I think that's just how people think of Darkhawk. They think,
Uh,
yeah.
Look, what Tom gave us was a solid but short, bare bones Bible.
Hmm.
So it left a lot of room for improvising and adding on to it. Um, so that's what I did, and I had a lot of the editors I worked with, Greg Wright and Howard Mackey and Nell Yumtov. I'm sure I'm leaving out some people. Their assistants, John Lewandowski and Richard Ashford. I'm definitely going to leave somebody. There's no way everybody was very supportive, and there were good people to bounce ideas off of and put stories together with. And Mike brought a lot of great ideas to the table visually and story wise.
Yeah.
Todd Smith drew the second 25 issues, and Todd's a terrific artist. But since Mike was the one who had established the character, of course, it's what fans remember most fondly. I think of those first 25 issues and the annual.
Mike has such a unique style. I think it stood out in the 90s. Just these thick lines, but also like just really solid. He didn't really go into that super exaggerated type of style that that the Todd McFarlane's did and everything. What was it like working with Mike back then, and what's it like working with him now?
Well, it's Mike and I. When I became the editor of Alpha Flight, Mike was the inker on it, and well, it's funny. Maybe you and I have talked about this in one of our thousand other episodes. Mike, the whole world, kids, in the days before email, you'd actually get on the phone with somebody and talk. That's that, and that was sort of part. That's really part of an editor's job. Um, because you're dealing with freelancers who very often are alone at home at their drawing board. Even if they have families, their kids are out of school, their wives are working, or they don't want to bother them when they're doing their comic. So there's this so it's a sense of they like to have somebody to talk to, and so I used, Mike is a man who likes to talk, as am I. So we would have these long conversations when he was the inker on Alpha Flight, and so it just sort of seemed like a natural thing to be working with him. Um, he got he was fun to collaborate with, and he loved to draw action. But you're right, he was more I think his preference is more of a classical comic artist. I think I could be wrong, but I think maybe he worked with Al Williamson. I could be getting people
I can
mixed
see
up.
that. I can see
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And he definitely worked. Brett Breeding and he were good friends, and they worked together. So yeah, and Mike now does the Phantom newspaper strip and Judge Parker. So he's actually got a lot of different styles, but he's got that classic look. And I mean, strangely enough, years later, not that many years, I guess, but 10 in the 2000s, he was doing Draw magazine for Tomorrow's, and I looked at that and I said, I wonder if they'd want to do a writing magazine
Yeah.
like Draw. So no, and I pitched it to John Morrow, And I said, I'm not making any secret. I'm ripping off Mike's idea here. He's doing an art magazine. How about one for writing? John was thinking the same thing apparently, and so we did it. And then, of course, Mike and I did perhaps the world's first and maybe only crossover between two trade magazines. Where we where we did the Right Now Draw crossover. We created a new character, still available if anybody wants to pick up the option, the Thief of Time. But again, we were able to do that because we had worked together on Darkhawk and kind of enjoyed working together and spending hours on the phone or now on email schmoozing. So yeah, Mike was, I think Mike was more, and this is probably a good thing for a comic. I think where I maybe would get a little cerebral, Mike would want to get to the action right away, and he had a pretty good commercial or very good commercial sense. So, just action and stuff blowing up. But he did the soap opera stuff great too, so it was just fun, I mean, that's, and that's always, as a writer or an editor, that's always the, as a non-drawing writer and editor, the most magical part of the job is pre-internet. Yeah, when the art, I was gonna say when you open the envelope. I guess now it's when you download the file. But like my imitation of somebody using a computer. When you open the envelope or download the file and you see this idea that you thought might sort of kind of possibly work, and there it is. Somebody usually has drawn it much better than you could imagine it. So yeah, so I mean, Mike and I had actually been talking about maybe pitching something with Darkhawk because of the anniversary, and so we had started preparing something, that I guess if Marvel didn't buy it, we'd call it like Shadow Bird or something, and put it out
with slight changes.
Yeah, right. But it, so I sent an email and I said, to the powers that be at Marvel, and lo and behold, they said, yeah, we want you guys to do a story. So we sort of had a little bit of a running head start on it.
What do you think is it about Darkhawk? Because as you've mentioned, there was a lot of characters that came out in that era. There was even that one year where all the annuals was the introduction of a new character. So what do you think is it about Darkhawk that's kind of made him, stick around?
Did anybody make it? I know we had a character called Annex that had a miniseries that was in one of the Spider-Man annuals.
I unabashedly love Annex.
Do you really? Oh, cool.
I do. He makes no sense, and I love him.
He's also got one of those names that's like, you mean he's a building next to he's a second building next to the first building? I mean, well, but it had an X in it,
I loved how his whole premise was, I want to learn how to walk, and this armor gives me, I want to walk again. This armor gives me an extra leg. I have to wear the armor in order to have the extra leg, but it gives me an extra leg.
Well,
I'm like, I love it. Give me more.
It's a great comic book concept, and Tom Lyle drew it wonderfully. Jack Harris wrote it and created it. He and Tom. I think that might have been Lyle's maybe first thing he did at Marvel.
It's possible, yeah.
After I lured him over with Spider-Man,
you lured him over from when he was doing Robin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think he wanted to be lured, because he came up. Maybe he came up with Chuck Dixon one day. Yeah. I mean, you don't just happen to show up. You're not an up and coming hot artist at DC, and you just happen to show up at Marvel just because you wanted like a free tuna sandwich. You show up because
I have this theory that most people who draw Robin as an ongoing would rather be drawing Spider-Man.
Or Batman Beyond, I guess.
Lots of the same elements.
Yeah.
And what?
So what was the question?
Yeah. So like, what do you think is it about Darkhawk that kind of made him stick around? Because like Sleepwalker's not getting a 30th anniversary, or Nomad is dead now, and
Well, I mean, I think he struck a chord with people because of that spider. Look, there were several characters, and I actually did a miniseries that I wrote in the mid '90s, where I put together Spider-Man and all the different, Spider-Man of the '70s, Nova, Spider-Man of the '80s,
That's actually
Speedball.
my next question, but okay. Okay.
Of the '90s
Yeah.
was Darkhawk. But of course, well, Speedball was reasonably popular, and Nova was very. I guess there's a
Oh, I meant of that batch of characters
yeah,
from
yeah,
the
yeah,
early
yeah,
90s.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was and you mean, well, Sleepwalker was a teenager. You know what? If I knew that, I'd do it every month. Or Marvel would do it every. I mean, I think he had. I mean, what Tom did build into it, um, was the original premise was that his father would be killed, in action, and while Chris was getting the Darkhawk amulet, and I added that twist about instead of him being killed, he ends up looking like he's taking a payoff, and that was a storyline we could riff on for years to come. But the idea that there was some trauma involving a father figure like Uncle Ben and Spider-Man, I think, I mean, aside from the fact that me, Tom, and Mike are geniuses, which goes without saying, but I think it's that Marvel soap opera sudden traumatic loss of a father figure. I think that's kind of a parental figure. I don't know. Have there been any characters who've lost their mothers in that way? Or, well, I guess Superman lost his mother and father twice,
Yeah.
and Batman lost his mother and so I get that loss of parental love and security is suddenly shattered, you know. Um, and then and then Chris is left with this responsibility as well as the power. His mother is a crusading assistant district attorney, and so she's always in the crosshairs of criminals who she's trying to put away. But he's got these twin brothers who are for whom he has to be the father. So I think it's got that classic kind of Marvel mixture of soap opera and action. But that's a guess. Like I said, if we, and when I say we, I mean if the companies knew how to do it, anytime they wanted, everything would be a hit. But I would say that and the visual, the look and feel that Mike gave it, and maybe an occasional clever word balloon that I would write.
And you mentioned that miniseries, Spider-Man: Friends and Enemies, where you put together Nova, Speedball, and
Yeah.
Darkhawk. That was the first time I learned that Nova and Speedball had been marketed as the Spider-Men of their decades.
Okay, well, I guess there's no
Was it-
reason that you would necessarily know. I guess by the time you came along, they'd been around for
Yeah, I
10 or
started
20.
reading in '89, so that
Yeah,
makes.
yeah. So,
So,
oh, Speedball, actually. Speedball was only, what, 86, 87? I mean, Speedball hadn't been along that long.
but I didn't realize I think that was when I first the marketing material for that was when I first realized what a template Spider-Man was
Was it?
for future characters.
Yeah, he was the template for future characters for many companies. That
Hmm.
was, you know, the innovation that Stan and Steve had was that a teenager didn't have to be in a teen gang and didn't have to be a sidekick. And I mean, you think about these guys, they're from a generation, and Kirby too, Stan and Steve and Kirby, they're from that World War II generation where young people had a lot of responsibility thrust on them, and so I think that was that they hit on something that it wasn't, it, wasn't teenagers, 'cause, 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 'cause you had like Flash Thompson and Liz Allen. You had the kids making fun of Peter Parker, and they
Yeah.
seemed to be the ones who were had well-to-do parents, and and Harry Osborn, the ultimate spoiled rich kid, and you know, um, but Peter, um, yeah, had these adult responsibilities, and yet he had this playful side. Yeah, yeah. So I think all those characters were riffs on that. Yeah, I don't know if it was. I guess maybe by the time I think Nova, as I recall, Nova was intended to be that. Because
Yeah.
even if you came along as a fan and you love Spider-Man, and obviously the whole world loves Spider-Man,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not relating to him as a teenager, because Peter quickly became a young adult. It wasn't, and then eventually was married to Mary Jane, and then I guess they kind of
Then not
undone.
married to Mary Jane,
Yeah,
and
well, but not divorced or widowed
but
either.
not
It's fair.
divorced or widowed.
um, but he's
This is
still
where you just skip that whole year of stories, people, and then you go straight to the next one.
but he's still in his 20s, right? He's not a teenager. So I think there's always that was the thing they came up with. Oh, a teenager who's not a sidekick and who's not, he's not one of the boy commandos, right?
Yeah.
He's this, and I think a lot of people related to that.
Would you say that not just in comics, but did he start that whole thing where a teenager is a superhero or is the main protagonist of these
I'm
things?
sure that somebody, whatever I say, I'm sure someone will find some history to prove me wrong. But because I'm trying to any of the characters. Yeah, I think so. I think he yes, I think that was an innovation. I mean, I mean, I'm thinking any of those movie, those Saturday morning serial, Henry Aldrich or any of those. I think even those kids were kind of the beginning of the whole concept of a teenager. The concept of teenagerdom is a fairly modern concept of the last like 80 years.
Post
You
World
know,
War II, right?
I think so. I mean, if you look at some of those Andy Hardy movies, you can see it. You can see it being alluded to in the movies of the era. So I guess there must have been some. But as a phenomenon and as a demographic and as somebody to sell stuff to, it's you would kind of go from childhood and then you'd get a job. I mean, the idea that adolescence was this kind of neither nor world, or this kind of idyllic uh, period, is a new thing. So yeah, I don't. I guess that, well, Superboy, I guess, was a teenager, but
They
not
kept
not
calling him a boy.
yeah. I guess he was supposed to be about 12 in the
Yeah.
beginning. Yeah, I
But
guess and there was Johnny Storm, but and then, well, the X-Men were like a team of Spider-Mans,
yeah.
and girl and woman, and the Fantastic Four had a teen character, so there was sort of,
So it was
you
kind
know,
of there, but I think he
I
was
think, well,
maybe
Spider-Man came out before the X-Men.
but I think he was maybe the first one with teenage problems,
Teenage
like
Problem,
real problems. Yeah.
and the other, and of course, every teenager feels like there's nobody who understands them and nobody they can talk to, and
Hmm.
and and that was Spider-Man's problem. He didn't, he rarely teamed. He would fight side by side or against other superheroes, but he didn't pal around with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, those first, especially the 38 Ditko issues and the two annuals, were pretty magical.
Yeah.
Somebody's been putting online, recently on Facebook. I'm not sure where they got the idea, but like the last page of started with, I don't know if it was FF1, but the last page of early Fantastic Four, like FF5, and then the same right next to it, the last page of Spider-Man 5. And I mean, I think the aim is maybe to show how great Kirby and Ditko are, and it does. But I think it also shows how terrific Stan was. But you can see those building. And well, look, Spider-Man. We're not going to finish by 8 o'clock.
Don't worry, we will.
Okay, we can go to part 2. Spider-Man. The classic Woody Allen character, and I know not everybody loves Woody Allen anymore, but when you want to think of a mild-mannered, nebbish loser, people go, oh, he's the Woody Allen character. Woody Allen gets the girl in every movie, solves the problem, defeats the bad guy. There's no Woody Allen movie which he doesn't come out on top, and yet you think, well, the same thing. Spider-Man, Peter Parker, this hard luck guy, and he's got all these problems and nobody understands him, but he always beats the bad guy. He has women fighting over him.
They're all supermodels, by the way.
All super. Well, we in comics, like to draw on our own real life experiences. So it's kind of and he's got these spider powers. So it's if this will be the ultimate solipsistic thing I might ever do. Just yesterday, DC Comics premiered a documentary that I happen to be a talking head in about Superman.
Yeah, good job. I've watched half of it.
Oh well, it gets even better in the second half. But there's one line. It's one of my favorite lines, and I'm glad that they used it. Where it's like Clark Kent, loser and cowardly and spineless and wimpy and shy and self-effacing and unattractive. Meanwhile, this guy gets the scoop and beats everybody else to the story every day of the week, literally every day of the week. So that, people shouldn't be wondering, I wonder if he's Superman. They should be wondering, how the hell does that guy get those stories? How does that like sniveling lowlife who slinks around the office, how does he go? So it's comics is really, again, I guess Siegel and Schuster and Back to the Scarlet Pimpernel, and just came up with that great thing of having your cake and eating it too. So I think I'm just rambling on, but I think
it's a little unethical of Clark. But
it's completely unethical. Did you ever read Fred Hembeck's work? Fred Hembeck.
Yeah.
Fred. Fred does a great job of kind of looking at those, those 50s and 60s DC comics, and the way Superman and Batman behaved. In a comic book world of comics written for children, it's fine. But when you look at the ethical implications of how they lead their lives and how they treat people.
There's that one early issue of Spider-Man where he fakes photos to get himself paid.
Look, there's that early issue of Fantastic Four where Reed fakes issue 2 fakes photos he clips artwork from a Marvel comic to show the Skrulls to convince them that they can't defeat the Earth's fearsome defenses. They didn't really think anybody over 10 would be dissecting this 7 years later.
What did you think of working? Because Friends and Enemies was basically at the tail end of your Darkhawk run.
Yeah.
So that's almost basically how you ended it. And what do you think of working with Ron Lim, who was one of the hottest artists at the time?
Oh, I love Ron. Ron is great. Ron's the best. Ron is endlessly enthusiastic. Whatever. Ron, we bought you a hamburger. Oh my God, that's the greatest thing. I love Ron. Have you ever met him or interviewed him?
I can't find any contact info for him, actually.
I'll see what I can.
There was a time when I would buy everything he drew.
Yeah, Ron.
And for a while, that seemed like everything.
Ron was great fun, and and very fast, without a loss in quality, and so he could bail an editor out of a deadline crisis too. Yeah, Ron. I like the Friends and Enemies series. It was near it did coincide with the end of my time at Marvel, which so there's some echoes of the nutty office politics that was
Yeah.
going on. Made me feel like I had to leave. Um, so I look back at it and I go, I wish I had, I wish everybody, starting with me, had focused a little better on it. But all things considered, it was fun to do, and I thought it would, it accomplished that fun thing I wanted to do, which was getting the Spider-Man of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s together.
What can we
Uh,
expect from Heart of the Hawk?
Heart of the
What
Hawk.
can the Hawkamaniacs expect?
Thank you. It's fine. That's a term I made up to promote. I mean, maybe somebody else. It seems like an obvious thing, but I think I made that up for the most recent promotion. It
Very
takes.
Stan Lee like of you.
Thank you.
Did you know you wrote a book about Stan Lee?
I did. Oh my god! If only I'd done the audiobook too. It what the hell was the question? How does it?
Yeah. What can we expect from?
If you liked the first 25 issues of Darkhawk, we've actually, we tried to not specifically say it happens in the 90s, but it happens in the 90s, and we said it because that would make Chris now like, 50 or something instead of 17 or 18. But it takes place in Darkhawk. It takes place more or less between issues 8 and 9, if you're reading along at home. And it's an untold tale of Darkhawk fighting the armored character known as Savage Steel, and flirting with Allegra Bazan, the daughter of the man who corrupted his father, seemingly. So it was fun to do. I mean, it's for better or worse, and depends who you ask. I'm still pretty in touch with my teenage side, so writing an adolescent is frighteningly easy for me.
We should all be in touch with our teenage side.
Well, we should be in touch with it, but not consumed by it.
The positive aspects of our teenage side.
Yes.
The angsty stuff we can leave behind.
But make sure to tap into that when we're writing.
And before when this goes up, it'll be before the first week of March. So you want to plug Will Eisner Week?
Yes, Will Eisner Week is coming up the first week of March, and I'm the chair of Will Eisner Week, which is a fancy way of saying that I spend a lot of my time sending emails and texts and phone calls to people, annoying them till they agree to do an event connected to Will Eisner Week. Will Eisner Week was the creator of The Spirit. He was one of the founders of the modern graphic novel with Contract with God and so on. I did a 3-hour show with Dory about it. You can go to his archives and find out more. But Will Eisner Week it's grown from like 1 or 2 events in New York to over 100 events worldwide. But this year, obviously with the pandemic, having events may not be practical for everybody. So we have put together some very exciting panels with people like Dennis Kitchen and Paul Levitz, and Todd McFarlane and Jean Lewin Yang and Jerry Kraft, and me talking about Eisner and various aspects of Eisner, so that if you or your organization want to get in on Will Eisner Week, we have these different programs that you can access at the WillEisner.com website. And if you really are a behind the scenes kind of person, we even have a one size fits all, me introducing, each, it's like blah, 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 da, 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 and we hope you'll enjoy this presentation. So, and again, it's something about me giving an overall talk about Will Eisner. So I don't think the stuff should be up by late February, and we hope you'll check it out. And one of the, I mean, it's the pandemic, but something that's a little positive is that if you weren't geographically or just
Yeah.
logistically able to attend or to hold a Will Eisner Week event, well, now, we made it a lot easier for you to get involved. So check out willeisner.com. In general, there's a lot of stuff, but especially late February, and see if you want to do an event.
Hey,
It is.
did you know that you wrote a book about Stan Lee?
So it just happens. By an amazing coincidence, I have a copy right here as well. Um, it's a biography. This is the hardcover. Doy has the paperback. It's a biography of Stan Lee. The paperback came out in September. Book was well reviewed by. It was a book of the year of Times of London. So there.
Nice.
I think it's a pretty objective view of Stan and his complicated relationships with his artists and with fame and the movies so check it out. And Dory, thank you
And
for the
your
opportunity.
style is to lay out the facts bare and let people come to their own conclusions as well.
That's what I'm trying to do. I think, I don't know if I'm going to, change anybody's mind if they come in with a certain idea about Stan, but I think I will increase their knowledge base. I think there's a lot of stuff in there. Put it in the context of world history, American history, pop culture history, and I hope it gives you a rounded view of who Stan was.
You have. I've seen it. I've seen somebody say that the stuff about his contracts in the 80s, in the 70s and the 80s, actually, when they found out that stuff, it changed their mind.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well,
Because I think people have a preconception of Stan that he just ran everything until he didn't.
yeah, but I mean, he never. I mean, it's fun. I mean, I know you got to wrap up, and I know that I think. I think the biggest misconception, when I tell people who are pretty sophisticated, he never owned any part of the company or any of those characters. He was a very well paid employee, and he certainly, was not poor, but, not as wealthy as somebody, you
You'd
would think, who co-created. He didn't own any more of those characters than Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko or you or me.
I got into it with somebody because somebody was like, "What do you mean he didn't live in a mansion?" Then he showed me a picture of Stan's mansion. I'm like, "Yeah, but it's Stan Lee. You'd expect a bigger mansion." Let's be honest.
I have a feeling, that, I mean, I don't, at some point, I have a feeling that real estate is going to be worth more than the house. I think it'd be one of those situations where it wouldn't shock me if once they settle everything with his estate and will and whatever, once the 10 million Stanley lawsuits are settled, I bet somebody bulldozes that house and build something,
Like a
that's a real.
Stan Lee museum.
Well, no, I think that would be nice, but probably just like a really garish, Hollywood mansion, because that house goes back. It's got to be like the 40s or 50s, if not before. It belonged. This will be a trivia test here. The house before Stan bought it was owned by Don Wilson. Do you have any idea who Don Wilson is? There's no reason you should, but this will be. He was Jack Benny's announcer on the Jack Benny program.
Oh wow.
Which is very appropriate. Stan was a huge. That's why when you ask Stan why are his archives in Wyoming at the University of Wyoming, he would say, and I think probably largely true. Well, Jack Benny's archives are there, so if it's good enough for him, good enough for me. So
sounds about right.
All right. Anyway, Doy, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming back on the show. Darkhawk, Heart of the Hawk #1 out in April. Will Eisner week, first week of March, and of course the Stan Lee book, always out on Amazon or wherever you get your books.
All right, and by the way, there's other people, and of course I'm old, so my mind is blanking. But there's other Darkhawk stories, some other periods in his life in the issue too.
Yeah, Dan Abnett, Andrea Vito, and Kyle Higgins. Exactly,
that's what I was going to say. So, so there's all sorts of Darkhawk from all eras and a bunch of cool painted covers and like that. So everybody stay well.
Care.